Welcome to my channel, End Times Bible Study. My name is Diane, and thanks for joining me today, and I'm glad you're here. We are currently studying the book of Revelation, and we are on chapter 17 today, which is about Mystery Babylon. And it's possibly, I'm just thinking going through Revelation, this is my second time teaching through. This might be maybe the most difficult chapter to really understand. And, just the name Mystery Babylon, a lot of people have strong ideas on who they think Mystery Babylon is. So I think that's an appropriate title. But this chapter does contain a lot of symbolism. And a lot of the symbolism itself is defined within this chapter, but also with correlating in other parts of Revelation and also correlating heavily with the book of Daniel. So if you just read chapter 17 with no knowledge of anything else in the Bible, I don't think you'd be able to understand it. So we will be looking at all those things as we go through. And another thing is with Revelation 17, it's, like Mystery Babylon is kind of the focus. And then Revelation 18 is talking about the destruction of Babylon the Great. So some commentators think these are two separate entities, Mystery Babylon being more like a religious Babylon, and then the Babylon the Great, like the commercial Babylon. But really, we see the same language used. It does seem like it's actually talking about one entity. So we'll go into that more next week when we cover Revelation 18. I'll allude to it a little bit today, but it does seem that they are separate. All right. So, and then before we jump into 17, we're going to read it in a minute, but just some brief history on Babylon, and this is very brief. But the ancient city of Babylon was located in what is today modern day Iraq. So the ruins are still there. It's mentioned some 260 times in the Bible, Babylon, so it's it gets quite a showing in the Bible. And the city was not destroyed as is described in these Old Testament prophecies that talk about the destruction of Babylon, such as Jeremiah 50:51, and also, oops, my batteries thing is plugged in, but hang on, let me try to fix this. Let me try to pause the video. Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes you think it's plugged in and the cords aren't adjusted right. So I think we're good now on the power. But as I was saying, let's see. Oh, yeah, just some of the Old Testament prophecies that talk about the destruction of Babylon, like Jeremiah 50:51 and Isaiah 13. And there's others where it's mentioned as well. But it's described as a sudden destruction, never to be inhabited again, and that even the stones for the city would not even be reused for anything else. And that's Jeremiah 51:26 is where that verse is. But instead, the Babylonian kingdom was conquered by Medo-Persia, and they kind of sneak attack and took over the city. I don't think there was much damage, and they just continued on, as a city for some centuries. And just over time, it kind of fell into disrepair. And like I think under the Seleucid Empire, he moved like the population out of Babylon, and it kind of just faded away over time. So today it's just ruins, but the destruction doesn't match what is described. And when you read through Jeremiah 50 and 51 and Isaiah 13, you see clear correlations to Revelation, even 17 and 18, as well as Armageddon taking place, like Isaiah 13 really looks like Armageddon when you read that through. And I did some videos on it maybe at least a year ago, but we worked through all of those chapters. So those videos are on my channel. And if you've missed any of my previous videos, my Revelation playlist is linked in the description box. So, all right. So that was kind of interesting about that on Babylon. Now I just want to mention, as far as Babylon, it's mentioned other than Revelation 18 and so forth, but it's mentioned in Revelation 14, verse 8. And that's where we saw the three angels that were flying through the air with messages for the earth dwellers. And that seems to be taking place at the midpoint of the tribulation. But the second angel has a message that's fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. And then Revelation 16:19, it's the seventh bowl. This chapter 16 is all of the seven bowls of God's wrath being poured out. And at the end of that, it's really like the tribulation ends at that point. And then we have, so that's chapter 16. Then 17 and 18, they're all talking about, it kind of backs up. It's like a little bit of a pause. It's like, okay, we find out that Babylon the Great is destroyed at the seventh bowl. And I'll just read you the verse. So the great city was split into three parts, referring to Jerusalem, and the cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. So we can see from that's when, Babylon is destroyed. So now it goes kind of like 17 and 18 kind of back up. And this is a common pattern in the Bible where it might give you kind of an overview, like a big picture of something. And then it goes back and kind of zeroes in and then gives you more details about what's actually happening. So 17 and 18 is focusing on Babylon and its destruction. And then chapter 19, we see it's a scene in heaven culminating with the return of Jesus Christ for the second coming in the Battle of Armageddon. So, all right. So we're going to start by reading chapter 17. One second here. Okay. It's a little bit smaller. Sorry. Sometimes I have trouble with all this technology. All right. So Revelation 17. So then one of the seven angels with the seven bowls came and said to me, so this is to John, the disciple, who's the author of Revelation. And as was mentioned, chapter 16 was just all about these seven angels pouring out these bowls of wrath. So now this is like kind of like a little bit of a backup, to give the big picture. Or, well, they gave the big picture. Now they're trying to give like the minute details in these two chapters. So come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. The kings of the earth were immoral with her, and those who dwell on the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her immorality. And the angel carried me away into a wilderness, where I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. She held in her hand a golden cup, full of the abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead, a mysterious name was written, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I could see that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and witnesses for Jesus, and I was utterly amazed at the sight of her. Why are you so amazed? Said the angel. I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. So the beast is, as we're going to see, is the Antichrist. So the beast that you saw, it was and now is no more, but is about to come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel when they see the beast that was and is not and yet will be. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. But when he does, he must remain for only a little while. The beast that was and now is not is an 8th king who belongs to the other 7 and is going into destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive 1 hour of authority as kings along with the beast. These kings have one purpose, to yield their power and authority to the beast. They will make war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings, and he will be accompanied by his called and chosen and faithful ones. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute was seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns and the beast that you saw will hate the prostitute. They will leave her desolate and naked, and they will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by uniting to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. All right, so there's 4 main themes in this chapter that we'll talk about. So number 1, we're going to review the 7 world kingdoms that appear to correlate with these 7 heads. And then we're also going to compare the dragon of Revelation 12, the Antichrist and his kingdom of Revelation 13, and then the scarlet beast here in Revelation 17. And then number 2, the woman/prostitute, which appears to be talking about the same person, the same entity. I mean, I kind of had wondered about that because the Greek word for prostitute is porneo, and then the Greek word for woman is gyneka. So I was like, they're using 2 different words here. But I mean, I don't know. When I tried to look into it more, I mean, most commentators seem to think it's talking about the same entity. So again, there's a lot of, it's a lot of symbolism here. It's a lot to really try to interpret. And, to be honest, I'm not sure if anybody really fully has it has the correct interpretation 100%, because it is a lot. And I think in some ways, like, we kind of have the overall framework with a lot of things that will be happening in the tribulation. But at the end of the day, it's almost like it's just going to have to wait and see how it really plays out, to find out, did we really understand exactly how every last detail is going to be. So, all right. So then, but anyways, the woman/prostitute is defined as the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So this is clearly a city that's being talked about. And the city is actually described in the chapter as sitting on 3 different things. One is the city is sitting on the scarlet beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns. Then it's also sitting on 7 heads, which are defined as 7 mountains. And then she's also seated on many waters, which represent the peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues or languages. All right. And then number 3, there are 7 heads, which are mountains, and 7 kings also. And the Antichrist is an 8th king, which is correlated to Daniel 11, where the Antichrist prototype, who's Antiochus Epiphanes, was also the 8th ruler of the Seleucid Empire. So we'll get into that. That was pretty interesting. And number 4, is there possibly a pre-trib rapture verse in this passage? So we'll talk about that. Now, there's some other things I wanted to cover. Unfortunately, when I practiced this video, it was like an hour and a half long. So I had to try to cut a lot out so it won't be so long. So I did want to talk about just the biblical criteria for Mystery Babylon, as well as what are some of the common cities believed to be Mystery Babylon. Probably the most commonly believed one is Rome, but there's other theories. So I'm going to do a dedicated video. Maybe I'll do Revelation 18 next week, and then the week after that, I might just go back and do more detail on this and really go into it in more detail on, like, kind of the pros and cons of the different ideas of the city. All right, so let's just scroll back up to. Oh, okay. So the first thing I want to do is the comparison of the dragon. So I made up a little document here. Comparison of the. It's not coming up. Try again. Oh, wait, I'm on the wrong thing. Okay, well, user error. All right. So, yeah, I think this would kind of help to just lay this out and just see all 3 together, because the dragon in Revelation 12, it's a huge red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 royal crowns on its heads. So that that imagery is defined as being Satan in verse 9 of chapter 12. So we've covered all this when we did the Revelation 12 video. But this seems to be okay. The 7 heads are these 7 mountains, and mountains in the Bible often are referring to kingdoms. And we'll look at this more. But so this is possibly, like, in a sense, 7 kingdoms that are really being referenced here that are represented by these 7 horns. So for Satan, he's emphasizing the rulers of these 7 world empires with the 7 crowns. The 10 horns are clearly referring to this final world empire, and there are these 10 kings that rise. And then, so that's who he seems to be, Satan seems to be, the imagery is pointing to the 7 world empires and their rulers. Now, for Revelation 13:1, this is the Antichrist, or his kingdom. Because as we see another pattern in Daniel chapter 7, which we'll see in a second, but, it talks about these 4 beasts that rise out of the sea, which are 4 empires. But then it also, actually first it says there are 4 kings that will rise. And then it says later in the chapter that these are, these are empires. So it's kind of like, an empire has to have a king. So, and obviously these empires all had more than one king. So that's a little bit like confusing in a sense, like, well, which king is really being referenced here? But anyways, Revelation 13, we see that there's a beast rising out of the sea with 7 heads, 10 horns, with blasphemous names on its horns. Now, notice here, 10 royal crowns on the horns. So this is emphasizing for the Antichrist kingdom, this final world empire that will exist right before the return of Jesus Christ. For that 7-year tribulation period, there's going to be these 10 kings that are going to be in play. So, emphasizes the 10 kings of the final Antichrist empire. Now, it also tells us in Revelation 13, and we went into this in a lot of detail when we did Revelation 13 part 1, but it tells us that this beast that comes out of the sea is like a leopard with feet like a bear and the mouth of a lion. So these are correlating with the same beasts in Daniel 7, which correlate with Greece, Medo, Persia, and Babylon. And then the 4th beast is the Antichrist empire that's discussed in Daniel 7. So the dragon Satan gives the beast his power, his throne, and great authority. So clearly a satanically empowered kingdom. Now, for Revelation 17:3, so we have a scarlet beast covered with blasphemous names, 7 heads and 10 horns. So this really is hearkening more back to the Antichrist himself, not Satan. So Satan is described as a huge red dragon, and this one is a scarlet beast. And the Greek words are different for red and scarlet. It's not the same word. So I think this is just, again, showing the similarity, because the Antichrist is being empowered by Satan and given all of this stuff to him. But again, the blasphemy, it's an Antichrist against God person, the Antichrist himself, along with his empire, and it's characterized by all this blasphemy. So then in Revelation 17, the prostitute is, riding the beast, which to me kind of shows like this city is exercising authority over the Antichrist and his kingdom. And then it talks about the beast was, now is no more, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. And that's correlating with Revelation 11:7. I think we're going to talk about this more as we go. So, but again, the Antichrist. So then Daniel 7, like I said, it goes through those other 3 beasts that correlate in the order of Daniel. It's actually Babylon, Medo, Persia, and Greece. And then the 4th beast is described as terrifying, dreadful, extremely strong, with large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed, it trampled underfoot whatever was left, different from all the other beasts before it. And here's where it mentions the 10 horns. Another horn, a little horn, came up among them and uprooted 3 of the first horns. This horn, so this little horn, is describing the Antichrist, had eyes like a man and a mouth that spoke words of arrogance. Again, correlating to Revelation 13 and what they talk about with the Antichrist there. So then there's an interpretation given to Daniel of this whole like dream / vision he's having. And it says that the 4 beasts are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But then down in verse 23, it says that the 4th beast is a 4th kingdom. So here we see that pattern of talking about, okay, yeah, these are kings, but it's also empires that will appear on the earth. So the 4th one is different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, and crush it. So obviously there's some, as we can see from the mark of the beast being instituted, and anyone refusing to worship the image of the beast is killed, and you can't buy or sell without the mark. And just, it's going to be really horrendous, the persecution that the saints are given over into the hand of the Antichrist for the final 3.5 years when all this is being rolled out as well with the mark of the beast. So anyways, and it tells us the 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. After them, another king different from the earlier ones will rise and subdue 3 kings. So it appears that the 10 kings are on the scene first, and then a little horn, like probably somebody that's not even involved, really too much in politics, like not like somebody you'd say that's well known, but someone kind of unknown is going to come on the scene. And this person at the beginning of the 7-year period is already going to have confirmed a covenant with the many for 1 7-year period. Now, at the midpoint of the 7 years, he goes into the temple in Jerusalem, which is obviously rebuilt, and he stops the sacrifice. So Jerusalem is invaded at the midpoint of the tribulation and then overrun for the final 3.5 years. And I've covered this a lot on other videos. So, but anyways, it seems like these 10 kings are on the scene. And it says he subdues 3 kings, but we see in Revelation 17 that there's still 10 kings there, and they give all their power to the Antichrist. So probably what's happening is when he subdues them, he's just, takes them over by force, like they're still there in power, but now they're under his complete control. And they're basically having to go along with what's happening, whereas the other 7 seem like they're quite willing. So, all right, so let's just briefly review with these 7 heads, if they're representing these 7 kingdoms, what 7 kingdoms would those be? So remember, the Bible is always Israel-centric, and it's always focused on how everything relates to Israel. Israel's like the center of the world. I know for those of us who live in America, we think America is the center of the world, but biblically, that's not the case. So, all right, so there really have been 7 world kingdoms that have ruled over either the Jews themselves, starting with Egypt, or, their land and the Jews, So real quick, I'm going to run through these. Egypt, the Israelites were enslaved by them. Assyria, then they had conquered the 10 northern tribes of Israel in 722 BC. Babylon conquered, and now Babylon's corresponding to the lion of the Daniel 7, but Babylon had conquered Judah, the 2 southern tribes, in 605 BC. So I'm going to show you some maps as we go along. I was going to show more, but just for sake of time, I'm just going to show you Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece in particular. Maybe I'll show you the rest of them too, but let me pull that up. No, that was actually Assyria. Okay, so that's the Assyrian Empire. But since they're not really, a focus here, that's why I was going to kind of skip just because I'm trying to make this shorter. All right, so the Babylonian Empire you can see here, and there's modern day Iraq. There's where the original Babylon was. So the ruins are in modern day Iraq. I can't remember if I said that before or not. All right, so that's Babylon. Then Babylon's conquered by Medo-Persia. And so you can see the size of the Medo-Persian Empire. Now what you need to be looking at with this is how much these land areas recapitulate each other, because if the Antichrist kingdom is made up of these 3, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, it's like that's what we're looking for this revised Antichrist empire. Like, what was the landmass of these areas? And really all of these empires, maybe with the exception of Rome, but they all really seem to recapitulate, let me go back to that little document. and just see. Okay, so yeah, so Babylon conquered by Medo-Persia. Then we have Greece. And so they conquered Medo-Persia in 330 BC by Alexander the Great. So he dies young. He's age 32, and ironically dies in Babylon. So then Greece gets divided up into basically 4 main parcels. And the most significant and the ones important for our purposes are really the Seleucid Empire, and which is the king of the north was the ruler for that, described in Daniel 11. And then the Ptolemy Empire, which was the king of the south, which was more like, Egypt area. So let's look at some of those maps. All right, so we did Medo-Persia. So yeah, just to refresh. Okay, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. Greece. It's like, look at how similar these are. All right. And so then with Greece getting divided up, the Seleucid Empire, again, this is Turkey up here. So it had a little bit of Turkey, a lot of what we would say is modern day Syria and so forth, Lebanon, and then Iran over here, and, on over, it stretched pretty far. The Ptolemy Empire was down below. Let me just show you that. So that was mainly like, the North Africa area, including Egypt. Egypt was kind of the main player there. Now, then Greece is conquered by Rome. So the Roman Empire ended up being divided into 2 just because it was too big for one person to rule. So the green portion on the left is the Western Roman Empire. Now that fell in like 476 AD. They were conquered. So then that was gone. Rome was their capital. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, this is, I'll make sure I've got my geography right here. You've got Turkey. Wait, maybe this is the area of Turkey right here. And so that's where their capital was, in what is today modern day Turkey, in Constantinople. So when they get conquered by the Ottoman Empire, they just took that over as their capital and renamed it Istanbul. So that's very interesting. But you can see that they're really, as far as the other land masses, they had more of Europe and less of the whole Eastern area. So, again, if you're looking at what will the final empire look like, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, or Greek Empire. All right. And then, of course, Seleucid Empire there. So, all right, so then the Ottoman Empire, it had different caliphates and so forth. This is one of the Abbasid Caliphate. So again, you see, like, this is almost like the identical area that we've been showing. You've got Northern Africa and then all this area here. So, all right, so let me get back to my little document. But some of the important things, well, we'll talk more about Daniel 11 in a little bit, but the king of the north, that's the main Antichrist prototype in the Bible is Antiochus Epiphanes. There's some others I would say would also be prototypes, but he's probably the strongest candidate. And Antiochus Epiphanes is the 8th king of the Seleucid Empire. Okay, and the Antichrist described here in chapter 17 is the 8th king. So it's like, wow. And in both Daniel chapter 8 and chapter 11, both times, it's like the Antiochus Epiphanes is being prophesied about. So it's like clearly looking back from history later. You can see this is Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a horrible person who desecrated the Jewish temple, killed a lot of Jews, and there was horrible persecution that broke out against them under his rule. But both times in Daniel 8 and 11, it's like talking about him, and then it just morphs into talking about the Antichrist. And there's clearly future prophecies that have not yet been fulfilled. So that's really, like, all these things are like clues that are helping us put this puzzle together on how all this is going to play out. But his his capital was in Antioch, which in that time was like considered Syria. But it actually is located in modern day Turkey in a town called Antakya. That's where the Antioch was. And it was a very important city in its day. All right. So as we talked about, Greece fell, Rome conquered Greece, and then the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. But now the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half, they chugged along for like about another 1,000 years before they were conquered by the Ottoman Turks. So it's always kind of amazing to me in a way that when we're looking at, okay, the final empire out of all these empires that have been there, the final empire that then has a revised empire could only be Rome or the Ottoman Empire. Those are really the only two candidates. And, as far as if it was Rome, why wouldn't you think maybe the Eastern Roman Empire was in play, which that's where all the action is where we're talking about everything that's happening. It's showing that area. So, but the other theory is that it's not even Rome as the fourth kingdom, but it's actually the Ottoman Empire, Turkish Empire / Islamic Caliphate. So, I think I've talked more about that on some other ones, so I'm not going to go into more detail on that. But all right, so I wanted to just kind of look at that. Now let's go back to Revelation 17, and we're just going to try to work through the text. So again, the woman is described as a city. So, okay, the prostitute who sits on many waters. So verse 2, the kings of the earth were immoral with her. So how, if this is a city, how are kings being immoral with a city? So the answer to that really is just that in the Old Testament, you can hardly read through these Old Testament prophets without seeing like example after example after example, often of Israel being called out for their spiritual idolatry, and it's likened to, like sexual immorality, basically. So there is one verse in Hosea that talks about that. So Hosea 4, we're going to read 10 through 12. So it says, they will eat but not be satisfied. They will be promiscuous but not multiply, for they have stopped obeying the Lord. So there's the key right there. Nations that are, which mostly never were obeying the Lord, but initially Israel, that they were like God's chosen people given his laws. And, this is how you need to conduct yourselves and to worship only the one true God. But unfortunately, they kept being corrupted basically by these surrounding pagan nations and adopting their practices and so forth. But anyways, it goes on to say, promiscuity, wine, and new wine take away understanding. My people consult their wooden idols, and their divining rods inform them. So they're worshiping false gods, and it seems like, what I would describe as occult practices. For a spirit of prostitution leads them astray, and they have played the harlot against their God. So, yeah, it's a common theme. Another verse that really, that's actually pretty graphic, Ezekiel 23, it's describing the basically spiritual idolatry as sexual immorality against Samaria, which was the capital of Israel, and Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. So, yeah, Ezekiel 23, if you want to look that one up. So, all right, and then this is, the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her immorality. So, it's just people this time are just going to be so given over to their rejection of God and their worship of this, this false Antichrist, or not really, a false Messiah, the Antichrist himself isn't false, but you know what I'm saying. All right. So then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. Now, the interesting thing about wilderness there is the Greek word there is erémos, which is translated as a desert, desolate, solitary wilderness. That's from Strong's Concordance. So I think that's a clue that, if this is where, John is carried away in by the Spirit into a wilderness, so like a desert. where he sees the woman. He sees this city that's sitting on basically the Antichrist kingdom. And I think that we should keep that in mind. If you're looking for biblically what would fit Mystery Babylon, you need to be thinking of somewhere with a desert. Okay, just saying. All right, so then, and there's a couple other verses that were interesting. Matthew 24 is Jesus's own words describing the end times and his second coming. And so Jesus is telling his disciples, if they tell you there he is in the wilderness, meaning if they, Jesus is there, do not go out. So again, are they going to be like, oh, the Messiah is found in the wilderness at the city? I mean, I don't know, but that's interesting. It's the same word used there. Because when Jesus returns, every eye will see him. There will be no question that where he is. And until that point, anybody who tries to tell you Jesus is here or there, that's not true. It's a lie. So, all right. So then it talks about how she's dressed. And this is also correlating. Let me just flip over to Revelation 18, because the same exact wording is used in 18:16. And I'll do more of this next time, but just for the heck of it, we'll look at this now. So this is where, describing the destruction of Babylon the Great. And it says, woe, woe to the great city, clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in a single hour, such fabulous wealth has been destroyed. So that's where I'm saying, because when I first taught through Revelation a couple years ago, all the texts, all the resources I was using were all saying this is two separate entities. But when you start looking at the correlations, it doesn't seem that that's the case, because it's being described the exact same way here. All right, so let's see. Now, as far as this golden cup she's holding, there's another verse in Jeremiah 51:7 that is pertinent. Let's see, to make this bigger. Okay. So it's talking about, judgment on Babylon. And then it says in verse 7, Babylon was a gold cup in the hand of the Lord, making the whole earth drunk. The nations drank her wine. Therefore, the nations have gone mad. So yeah, there's a lot of imagery about, God's cup of wrath being poured out, God's bowl of judgment, all these different things. And then Babylon having this, cup representing all of her sins and evil and idolatry. Okay, so, and one other point on just the wilderness verse, I forgot to mention this verse. Isaiah 21:1 also talking about Babylon, and it's described as the desert by the sea. So that's kind of interesting. All right. So the mysterious name is written. So, again, just saying Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And then we see in verse 6, she's drunk with the blood of the saints and witnesses for Jesus. So again, is somehow this city associated with, the main persecution that breaks out against Jews and Christians during this final 3.5 years. So, yeah. All right. So then now the angel's like, I'm going to tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast. So, all right, the beast that you saw, it was and now is no more, but is about to come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. So that's kind of a puzzling verse as far as what does that really mean? And when we looked at, the first time we see the beast mentioned is Revelation 11:7. So I think, do I have Revelation 11 pulled up here? Yeah. All right. So this is the chapter primarily dealing with the two witnesses. So it says that when the two witnesses have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the abyss will wage war with them and will overpower and kill them. So, and then if we flip over to Revelation 13, then that's the next time we see the beast talked about. And we see in verse 3 that one of the heads of the beast appeared to have been mortally wounded, but the mortal wound was healed, and the whole world marveled and followed the beast. They worshiped the dragon, who's Satan, who had given authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can wage war against it?" So clearly, whatever is happening here has a profound effect on the earth dwellers, and they, the Antichrist seems invincible. No one can wage war. And again, is it the Antichrist empire or just the Antichrist, or kind of both? Because when it does say, this beast is described as having 7 heads, and it's saying one of the heads has a wound, is that referring to, one of the empires? But if you keep, looking further down in the chapter, in verse 12, we see the false prophet then arises, and this beast exercised all the authority of the first beast and caused the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose mortal wound had been healed. So that seems like it is talking about the Antichrist having this, this mortal wound. And then it goes on and mentions it again, verse 14, because of the signs it was given to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image to the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet had lived. So, so it's kind of like, back to Revelation 17, the beast that you saw, was it like, okay, the Antichrist is here, he gets some sort of fatal wound with a sword, and somehow, basically dies. But then he's maybe indwelt with a demonic force and comes back. Because the thing about when it says comes up out of the abyss we saw was opened in Revelation 9. And maybe I'll just pull up Revelation 9 and take a look at that. But we saw that it was opened presumably by Satan, who was described as a star that had fallen from heaven at the 5th trumpet judgment. So the star is given the key to the abyss. The star opens the pit of the abyss. And then out of the pit come these demonic locusts. So it goes on to talk about the demonic locusts. And then it says that in verse 10, the demonic locusts, that they had tails with stingers like scorpions, etc. Verse 11, they were ruled by a king, the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek it is Apollyon, which, if you look at the footnotes for that, it means destruction and destroyer. So the question I have with Revelation 17 is, and even with 11, the beast is coming up out of the abyss. That's implying a demonic entity. And, so a lot of people think that the Antichrist will be indwelt by Satan, and that might be the case. But it seems to me that it's just stating that that Satan is giving the beast all this stuff. And is it possible maybe he's indwelt by this other spirit that comes up out of the abyss? I don't know. That's just one of those things that, if you think about what's in the abyss, because even the Antichrist as a man, if he dies, he's not going into the abyss, which is a holding cell for demonic entities. He would go into Sheol, which is the holding cell for humans, until the great white throne judgment, where you're called up, and then if your name's not in the book of life, you go into the lake of fire at that point. That's after the 1,000-year millennial reign that occurs. But we do know that the Antichrist, he's thrown into the lake of fire immediately upon the return of Jesus Christ. And so he doesn't, it's like, do not pass go, do not collect $200. He just goes straight on in along with the false prophet. That's in Revelation 19. So Yeah, so that to me is a little puzzling. That's kind of my thoughts on that. If you've got some other ideas, feel free to leave a comment. So, all right, and then it's just basically anyone whose name is not written in the book of life, and these are people that have made a choice to reject Jesus Christ, and God knows ahead of time who's going to choose him and who will reject him. So their names aren't there, and they are going to be marveling at the beast because he was, is not, and yet will be. So, and conversely, if it's applying to a kingdom, you could say, well, okay, say it's the Islamic Caliphate, because that was ended at the end of World War I. That's when the Ottoman Empire fell, because they had aligned themselves with Germany for World War I. And at the end of that, so I think it's like 29, maybe, somewhere around there, where the caliphate was eliminated, and Turkey came into, as its country, and it was modernized by Ataturk, and they didn't have the caliphate anymore, which is like this ruling Muslim leader. So that's why a lot of these hardline Islamic groups are trying to regain the Islamic caliphate. So if you're thinking of this in the context of a whole Muslim Antichrist, the Middle East, those areas I showed you on the map, I'll just pull one of those up again. These are all Muslim areas, other than Israel, this little, you can't see it on this map, but this little tiny strip of land about the size of New Jersey right around here, maybe a little bit lower. But, the rest of these are all these stand nations, Pakistan and so forth, that's over here, Iran, these are all Muslim countries, Turkey. So, now not Greece, which over here is Macedonia, but northern, Egypt and North Africa, all this stuff is Muslim. So if you think about it, even Muslim Antichrist, and it's like if they bring back, kind of their empire, the Islamic Caliphate, that could be like a shock and awe moment. Plus, Antichrist has invaded Jerusalem at the midpoint and desecrated the temple. He stopped the sacrifice. And, so there's all this stuff. You can kind of see that if that's the mentality, how that would all play in. So, sorry, I keep going to the wrong thing here. All right, so they're all marveling. All right, so then verse 9 says, this calls for a mind with wisdom. And that also harkens back to Revelation 13, which now I've clicked off of what that one, but Revelation 13:18 says, here is a call for wisdom. Let the one who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and that number is 666. So it's kind of the same thing about, you need wisdom, a mind with wisdom. And again, wisdom comes from God, and these things are, by and large, spiritually discerned. For a non-believer to read this, and also, like I said before, if you have no knowledge of anything else in the Bible and you try to read this chapter and understand what it's talking about, you're probably not going to know. But now it talks about the 7 heads or 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And there's also 7 kings. So let's talk about that, because often in the Bible, mountains refer to kingdoms. So if you think about it, try to picture this city that's kind of a culmination of these 7 previous kingdoms, ones I already showed you. And that's like the foundation. And in the fact they're saying there's also 7 kings, that makes me feel like this is talking about kingdoms. Now, whether there are 7 literal mountains also associated with the city, that's also a possibility. But just, for an FYI, the word for mountains used here is the Greek word oros, which means mountains. Now, if it meant to say hills, it would have said the Greek word bonos. I don't know if I pronounced that right. But anyways, it's a different word. But that's not the word that's used. So a lot of times people look at this and they're like, oh, well, Rome was the city built on 7 hills. So this is how can you even question this, that this is Rome being talked about here? Well, you have to really dig deep and just not take things on face value, because Rome is not built on 7 mountains. All right. I'll tell you a city that is described that way is Mecca, Saudi Arabia, which is in the desert. But when I was researching Mecca before, a couple of years ago, when I did a video on that, And it just was like their own, like, it wasn't a Christian site. It was something to do with Mecca, like their website. And it says, oh, built on 7 mountains. I was like, huh, well, that's interesting. And we'll talk more about the 7 mountains in a second, too, as some other cities. But it says, as far as the 7 kings, it says 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. So, again, somewhat difficult to know exactly what's being referenced, because one problem I have with this is just that for John, all of this stuff that that's being revealed to him is like a future prophecy, and it's talking about, the context here is like during this final 7-year kingdom. But so I don't know, but if you look at it in terms of the 7 world empires, you would say the 5 that have fallen are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece at this point in time when John's writing this. 1 is, which he's under the Roman Empire at this point, and the other has not yet come, meaning then the Ottoman Empire, presumably. So, but then I have a little trouble figuring out how that fits in. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while, because it doesn't seem like they're talking about the Antichrist right there. Unless it's just referring to the revised, the final Antichrist kingdom. But, the beast that was and now is not. So the Antichrist is an 8th king who belongs to the other 7 and is going into destruction. So it's the second time they're saying he's going into destruction. So again, he is going straight into the lake of fire at the end of the tribulation. So let me just take a look at my notes here and see what points I might have wanted to make. Okay. Yeah, so all of these kingdoms I mentioned are all pagan kingdoms, and again, some believe it could be maybe a Jewish Antichrist, but it doesn't seem to, if that's the correct interpretation, that this is these previous 7 kingdoms, those are all pagan kingdoms, and, the Antichrist is belonging to those kingdoms, in a sense, or to these other kings. So that would indicate a pagan, non-Jewish person. So, yeah, I think I already went over the whole thing on the 8th king correlating with Antiochus Epiphanes. So I don't need to recap that. But, all right. So yeah, so some of the cities built on just described as 7 hills. Like, you can go on the internet and do a search. So Wikipedia lists over 100 cities that supposedly are built on 7 hills, including Staten Island, Yonkers, Washington, D.C., Athens, Greece, Jerusalem, Amman, Jordan, which is the capital of Jordan, Mecca, Saudi Arabia, Tehran, Iran, which they've been in the news a lot with this whole 12-day war, which is still, like, is it over? I think we're on, is it day 12 or day 13 today? So, it's hard to say what's really happening right now with that. Also Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, located in Turkey. Kiev, Ukraine is another. Moscow, Russia. Rome, Italy, amongst many others. So you can pull up that list and look if you want. But, if you want to say, well, and this was just saying more hills. So I don't know for some of these if they're, what's the differentiation between mountains versus hills? Because this passage is talking about mountains. But, again, there's you certainly can't just say, well, it must be Rome, because there's a lot of other cities that could fit the bill here. All right. So moving on, the 10 horns are the 10 kings. And so that, we saw that's in Daniel 7 is the first time the 10 horns are mentioned, and it's in conjunction with this final Antichrist empire. Daniel chapter 2, Daniel is interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream of this statue, of which Babylon is defined as the golden head of the statue. And then presumably the next one, it's like really 4 kingdoms with a revised kingdom coming out of the last one. And really an additional kingdom beyond that, because Jesus Christ sets up his kingdom, which is described as a mountain that fills the whole earth. So there's another reference there I think I forgot to give you the references for the mountains, but that's one of them, is the Daniel 2 prophecy. But that one has for the statue of this man, there's 2 legs and then the 2 feet with the 10 toes. The 10 toes seem to be corresponding to these 10 kings, and this is the final empire. So, and of course, Revelation 13, we already went over that one. So it says that they have, it says here, where am I on this thing? Okay, the 10 kings, they have not yet received a kingdom, but will receive 1 hour of authority as kings along with the beast or the Antichrist. So Daniel seemed to indicate these 10 kings were already in play. So maybe there's some sort of special sort of authority that they're being given, and, something to do with how, because it's also like saying 10 kings have not yet received a kingdom. It's like, well, don't they each have their own kingdom? So there's some questions there on exactly how that will play out. But the kings have one purpose: to yield their power and authority to the beast. So, and as we mentioned before, 3 of them appear like they tried to protest, but the Antichrist whips them into shape and they are forced to capitulate. So, all right. So then they make war against, now this is the verse that is like, is this talking about the pre-trib rapture? And I'd never noticed this before, but, I was preparing for this lesson. I'm reading through this and I'm like, this sounds like it could be. All right. So let's take a look at that. All right. So they're going to make war against the Lamb, and who's Jesus Christ, and he will triumph, and he will be accompanied. So it's talking about his second coming when Jesus comes back. He's accompanied by his called and chosen and faithful ones. So who's that? Wouldn't that be us? His children, his believers, his followers. Now I was talking to my husband about that. He said, well, it could be interpreted that maybe it's those who've already died. But by the same token, Revelation 19 is a scene in heaven right before Jesus is returning, and the bride of Christ, who's the church, is seen in heaven at that point, preparing for the wedding supper of the Lamb, and presumably to return to earth with Jesus at his second coming. So I do see that correlation, but I did look up really quick the let me see here, the 3 words here in the Greek: his called, chosen, and faithful ones. So called was the Greek word kletoi. And the definition, this is from Strong's, was invited, in other words, appointed, or a saint. And then Jude 1:1. Then you can also look up all the verses that use that word. So there was quite a few. I just picked out one in Jude 1, and with the word kletois. So Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother of James, to those who are called, loved by God the Father, and kept in Jesus Christ. So, the context is certainly the believers. And then the word chosen, the Greek word is eklektoi, and that means to select, by implication, a favorite. And then Colossians 3:12 said, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with hearts of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And then the word faithful is the Greek word pistoi, and that was defined as trustworthy, faithful, and also believing. And so it had a whole bunch of verses where that was used, and 13 of the times in the New Testament it was translated as believer. And it said, 2 Corinthians 6:15, what harmony is there between Christ and Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? So I was like, well, no, I guess for some people who don't want to believe in a pre-trib rapture, nothing you can say will really persuade them. But for those of us who do, that seemed like more confirmation. So, all right. So in conclusion, well, let me just see if there's anything else here. The picture line. Okay. Yeah. One other point just to make. We already talked about the waters being the peoples and so forth. And and this always seems kind of strange to me that the Antichrist and the 10 kings, they hate this city and they are going to destroy her. They leave her desolate and naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So it talks about her being destroyed by fire, which is what Revelation 18 talks about as well, is that they're destroyed by fire. And it's God who's ultimately behind it, the destruction, but he has put it into the hearts of the Antichrist and the 10 kings to carry out his purpose. But this is by uniting to give their kingdom to the beast. So is there just one kingdom they're turning over? Again, that's an interesting point, but whatever the kingdom is, they give it to the beast, and then somehow that seems to be tied into the destruction of the city at some point, but until the words of God are fulfilled. So again, all of these prophecies, there's all these Old Testament prophecies that have to be fulfilled. Jesus already fulfilled a bunch at his first coming, and the rest will be fulfilled at his second coming, and then also the millennial reign, and then the new heavens and new earth. So that's all still prophecy to come, but so there's still words of God to be fulfilled. And then it talks about the great city rules over the kings. The woman is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So I don't know. I was thinking about in a sense of like this city, it seems like it is exercising all this control over the world and even over the Antichrist, since she's like riding the beast. And at the end of the day, it seems like most things in life doesn't boil down to money or power, and so maybe that's the problem, like the power is what they're looking for. But really, it does say God puts it into their hearts to do this. So, all right. So that's the end of the chapter there. So just to conclusion. So Mystery Babylon is defined as the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. And, if you're trying to think of like what city fits the bill, even now, it's like, even if you've like, a lot of people are like, oh, America's Babylon and all this stuff. It's like, America, number one, America is not a city, it's a country. But even if you said, okay, what's some city that, DC or something represents it. But as much sway as America has, do we really rule over all the kings of the earth? No. So, but the city is sitting on three things, which again, I don't see America really fitting into this, but it's sitting on the Antichrist, who actually has not been revealed yet. So, he's not on the scene, but the city is definitely associated there with the Antichrist. Then it's sitting on the waters, which is all these different peoples, languages, multitudes, nations. So kind of a worldwide sort of thing from the sounds of it. And then it's sitting on these, the seven heads, which are defined as these seven mountains, which appear to be correlating to these seven kingdoms, which would be Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and the Ottoman Empire. So these seven kingdoms have ruled over the Jews or her land. And the 10 kings, the 10 horns or 10 kings will be in power at the time of this final 7-year tribulation. And the city of Babylon the Great represents the culmination of centuries of gross idolatry, with a pantheon of false gods and rebellion against God, which certainly describes all 7 of these pagan kingdoms. If you just think about throughout the history and think about all those kingdoms, all their false gods, all the false worship, the idolatry, and this kind of, it just seems like the city is representing that culmination of all that and over the centuries. So, yeah. All right. So that's, this is only a little over an hour at this point. So that's better than an hour and a half. So I'm just going to give a quick call to salvation. Just if you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, today's the day. You don't know where you're going to be 5 minutes from now, unfortunately, with things going on in the world, it's like, a bomb could fall. Anything can happen, So if you don't know where you're going when you die, if you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you're going into Sheol, or Hades. So, but if you do know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you're going into heaven to be with Jesus, and you'll be with him for all eternity. So, Jesus came to earth, he's as fully God, fully man. And the reason he came was because he gave Adam and Eve one thing not to do in the Garden of Eden: don't eat from this particular tree. And they chose to disobey. And when they did that, that sin came into the world, and a curse came upon the earth. And everybody who's born is under that curse. And Jesus is like, okay, these people can never be good enough on their own, no matter how many animals they sacrifice or how many good works, they're still never good enough because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So he said, I'm going to come to earth and I'm going to do for them what they cannot do for themselves. I'm going to go become the sacrificial lamb and die on the cross. And as a perfect person who did no wrong and as God, I'm going to take all their sins on myself and I'm going to pay that price for them. And so then he died. He did that. He died. He rose again, came back to life 3 days later after he was buried. And then he's here on the earth for 40 days and he went back up to heaven where he's at the right hand of the Father. And then, he's there until he's going to be coming back at the end of the 7-year tribulation for Armageddon and to set up his rule and reign on the earth for the next 1,000 years after that with the saints ruling and reigning with him. So it's just turning to Jesus Christ, that, yeah, he is who he says he is. He's God. We have God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. That's what we call the Trinity. One God expressed in 3 persons. And we turn to him in faith and repentance. We repent for our sins because, our sin is what's separating us from God. So we confess our sins to God. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So that's so great. It's nothing we can do to earn it, but instead of serving Satan, now you'll be serving Jesus Christ. So, yeah, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. And next time we will be moving on to Revelation 18. And, leave me your comments. Like I said, I do think this was a pretty challenging chapter. And, I know there's a lot of different ways people are interpreting it. So feel free to let me know what you think. All right. And if you made it this far in the video, if you could please like the video, subscribe to my channel, make sure you hit the bell icon so you get all the notifications when I post a video, and even share the video. All those things and comments, all that stuff helps with the algorithm to get the message out to more people. So, all right. Well, hope you all have a good one, and we will see you in the next video, God willing. Bye.